Look up the word crazy in the dictionary and you might just find an asterisk beside the definition that says, listen to the Subiquitous podcast featuring Sue Duffield and you'll find out what crazy means. Sue's travelogue journey of unfiltered stories, impossible miracles, and faith-filled fun will be revisited right here. So buckle up and let's get going with this humorous travelogue of an unfiltered saint, Subiquitous.
Well, it's episode 52, the very last one of season 1. I can't believe it. It's hard to imagine that we've gone this far, and wow, has it ever been quite the journey. I talked with a few people this morning at a church I was singing and speaking for up here in Pennsylvania, and I was so astonished that there are actually people with silver hair and white hair and people my age carrying a Medicare card that are still very curious about the internet and still very curious about the fact that they can get a podcast on their phone. It's been so fun to watch this. So maybe if nothing more, I'm in the education business. I'm teaching the seniors how to use social media, how to take the time and actually learn. And man, they can have everything right there in their hands. You know, a lot of podcasts internationally are meant to a certain demographic of people. Most of them, in fact, I think the average age of those listening to podcasts are like in their 30s. But this is not the case for the Subiquitous podcast. We have people in their 80s that are listening to this podcast. And I welcome you. And I welcome you with open arms and a hand clap. But this is the week after Mother's Day. And now that we have some time to take a breath, and now that we have some time to think about all the festivities and the activities of the weekend, I gotta tell you this. I have never seen so much traffic and so many malls and shopping centers and Kohl's and Target and Costco jammed to capacity. I mean, it was like we have never shopped before in our lives. And I'm realizing people are finally getting out. They're finally getting out. And they're finally making plans with their family. And they're finally making plans to spend some money and actually go to a brick and mortar store instead of ordering on Amazon. But it's kind of fun. At the same time, it's not so fun for those of us that are back traveling somewhat again. I'm not fully traveling back, but I do have some engagements coming up in the next several weeks. And I gotta tell you, I'm not real happy about the traffic. I'm also not real happy about the detours on the roads. Are you kidding me? Seriously? I mean, couldn't they have worked on the roads when there were no vehicles on the roads last year? I mean, 2020. I mean, seriously, there was hardly anybody on the road. Couldn't they work hard enough? And then somebody told me, well, nobody wanted to work. They were getting unemployment. Do I dare keep that alive? But, oh my. So, yes, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too logical. But today's episode, I want to talk about a clamorous life. That word, Clamorous. There is nothing gentle and quiet about Subiquitous. You know that, I know that, and I raised 2 kids that are loud and obnoxious too. In fact, my grandsons are loud. I mean, especially Jameson. It's a wonderful thing. I'm not complaining. But I wonder when I'm with other people that are more introverted and more quiet and maybe more reserved, I wonder what goes through their minds when they've been around my family. My brother, for one, has a laugh that you can hear for a mile. And he's loud. I mean, he's really loud. So how do we raise kids like that? I don't know. Maybe it's because my grandmothers were loud. Both of them were obnoxiously loud. You could hear them. They, for one thing, my grandmother, Hilda Link, could not whisper. She didn't know how to whisper. It was one of those funny moments where she'd talk, she's whispering, no, she's not. She's just lowered the level. She thinks she's whispering because she's scrunching up her face. No, that's not whispering. But a few years ago, in fact, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, 11 years ago, when I was a blogger, much more than I am now a podcaster, of course, I'm kind of transitioning from that. I wrote a blog post called The Clamorous Life, and it got a lot of activity on it, a lot of people responding to it. It says, the clanging, crashing sound was deafening. You know, it pierced through our eardrums, and it settled itself deep into my bone marrow. And I stood there in shock for about a half minute and realized, here I go again. This is who I am, a calamity waiting to happen. Follow me around for a few weeks, and you'll get an even better view of how the comedy of errors seems to accompany me everywhere I go. It's crazy. I do not have to make up stories. I am a comedic story in the making every single day. You see, I was visiting a beautiful and tranquil beach town of Pawleys Island in South Carolina. And we stopped in one of those tacky tourist shops, you know, where you can buy anything and everything with Pawleys Island on it. And standing in line, waiting to buy ice cream, I noticed a setup of innovative umbrella stands. It was unique. It's caught my attention. You attach your beach umbrella into corkscrew-like apparatuses that keep the umbrella secured and immovable in the sand. Wow, that's pretty clever. And when I grabbed one, just to check it out, all of the remaining umbrella stands came crashing to the floor in a fluid domino kind of like motion. And I tried to stop them, but they came rushing off the rack as if something like a crazy conveyor belt was absolutely going wild. The sound was thunderous. The whole store, including Elvis singing over the piped-in stereo, came to a complete halt. And finally, as I crouched, trying to grab each one of the umbrella stands to prevent them from falling, I knew it was a lost cause. I just gave up. I just stood there. The aftermath of silence and stillness was even more deafening. Friends who were with me scattered in opposite directions of the store, pretending they didn't know me. And finally, my friend Jerry saw a man sitting on a bench nearby who had witnessed the whole fiasco. And he told him as he walked by, he said, you know, you wouldn't believe it if I told you what she does for a living. She's a neurosurgeon. Well, weeks later, you know what? I can still hear that clanging metal plastic hitting the cement floor. And sometimes when I think about it, I just laugh out loud because it was one of those purely crazy, slapstick, unplanned, Jerry Lewis-like moments. And I felt like a kid again. It's been like this my whole life. Other sounds, too, make me reminisce with a smile. And here are a few encouraging words for maybe young moms out there, since we're following the Mother's Day week a little bit further in. Take note of the sounds and let them resonate in your head and heart, because before you know it, the bearers of the obnoxious noise will grow up. So when my son David was a toddler, we would all come running whenever we heard a loud crash followed by him saying, "Uh-oh." You know, this was a good policy that we stuck to. Here's what I did as a mom. Number one, I kept one cabinet in the kitchen just for play dishes, toys, and things that our Annie could play with while I was busy making meals. She also knew that this was her space to be loud, have fun, and to pretend that she was cooking with Mom. It was pretty fun. And number two, I would suggest never making a big deal out of spilled drinks or accidentally dropped plates with your kids, especially at a public restaurant. I know, their embarrassment is already enough, and without a public display of scolding and yelling, I'm telling you, you're going to win in that one. I remember one day my brother at a restaurant spilled something, and my father just very casually, which was very rare for him, very casually picked up the glass and mopped up all of the milk around and said, "Don't worry, we'll order another one." And you know what? That stuck. Number 3, be very aware that those booming, ear-splitting moments of kids coming and going and slamming doors, spilt milk cartons and flying dinnerware, and an infinitum of crashing sounds will soon come to a halt one day. One day, as the empty nest reveals its deafening silence, you'll look back and be grateful for those moments of a full and clamorous house. Number 4, and I did this, and I still do it now with my grandsons. Record your kids' or grandkids' voices. I'd give anything in the world right now to have something of my grandmother and my grandparents' voices. And we have a little bit of video, but not enough that I can say that is prolific as we have it today through iPhones. But record them, hear them sing, hear them play. Make noise and ask your poignant questions. And record yourself telling them stories too, especially the ones when you did something quite foolish, clumsy, and loud. And trust me, you'll get their attention when you tell them how grandma messed up big time as a kid, or how grandma really made a serious mistake. You know, Jesus called over a child whom he stood in the middle of the room and said, I'm telling you once and for all that unless you return to square one and start over like children, you're not even going to get a look at the kingdom, let alone get in. Whoever becomes simple and elemental again, like this child, will rank high in God's kingdom. And what's more, when you receive the childlike on my account, it's the same as receiving me. And that's from Matthew 18, verses 2 through 5 in the Message. Jesus calls over a child and says, be like them. So my new life at 65, my new, quote, road life, unquote, my new life as far as being online through podcast and through our Couch to Kitchen concerts on Thursday nights, my new life is still childlike. And I have to tell you, I was just having the time of my life a few weeks ago in the nursery in our home church. Now, it's kind of God's forgotten area in most churches. My grandmother was in charge of the cradle roll, as they called it back in the day. And she used to say to everyone, you have no idea the power and the joy and the utmost happiness that I get from your children in the nursery. And she would watch them as they grow up. And so I never thought about it much. In fact, I never was involved in the nursery workers of our church. I wasn't really involved, in fact, at any time in that kind of a capacity. But just spending time a few weeks ago with some 2- and 3-year-old toddlers that I didn't know and they didn't know me, all I did was sit on the floor and we made a lot of noise and we had a blast. And one of the things that went through my mind was, and I know this is pretty easy to kind of figure out, but if the parents know that they're in a secure scenario, they can worship and they can sing the praises of God and they can listen to the sermon while their children are having a great time in the nursery. It was very loud. It was, in fact, one baby, we had a hard time settling down for a while, but eventually I won him over. I was so excited. It was my determination. It was going to be my mission that day. My mission was to make sure that young man would settle in and we wouldn't have to dial his mother's phone before the end of the service. And we won, and we were so happy. And I think even as a 3-year-old, I think he realized too that he had a major accomplishment. Now, his mom and dad told me later that he had never, since 2020, first of all, he hadn't even left his home, let alone go to a church or a public function. He hadn't even seen his grandparents in like 6 months. And so he hadn't been around anyone at all. So immediately they come to church where there's hundreds of people and babies screaming and squawking and talking, and you drop off your 3-year-old and all of a sudden walk away. I imagine it was trauma for that little man, but I was determined that it wasn't going to be trauma. So guess what we did? We decided we would be louder than he. So I created this little kind of a quasi drum set, and we were beating on these little drums, and we were making so much noise and loud, and suddenly I realized he was kind of enjoying watching this lunatic of an old woman trying to entertain him. It was a clamorous and a loud experience, but it wasn't too long. It wasn't too long that we were almost maybe 30 minutes into the nursery time. This young little boy finally came up and wanted to sit on my lap. And I thought, there it is. Maybe, just maybe, being loud works. Maybe. Not with every child, of course. You got to kind of know where they're coming from. But for this one was amazing. He loved loud sounds. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And what I'm saying is that I suffer from a physical tinnitus in my ears. It's been a slow process of the last couple of months. I've talked to my doctor about it. I've read books about it. It can be anything from a slight hearing loss from wearing headphones too loud when I was doing radio back in the day, or it even could be from a hair dryer, believe it or not. You should always wear earplugs with your hair dryer, they say. But as I'm reading more and more, I'm finding out that it's even more neurological than that. And so what do you think the craziest thing that I can even tell you right now is when do you think it is hardest for me with this tinnitus? You probably answered right. It's not when there's loud noises. It's not when I'm in worship with my church and their worship band. It's not during choir. It's not when I'm at a race or a car race or whatever. No, it's when I'm in absolute quiet. Absolute quiet is when this tinnitus goes absolutely insane. And so I've learned something. I've learned that sometimes in the back of your mind and in the back of your life, we can get so catatonic with all the noise that's around us that you're not even aware of the problems that you're going through. Loud noises are very obnoxious. Loud noises can hurt, and loud noises can cause deafening scenarios in your ears. And so when I go back and I think about what I could have done and what I wish that I had done, I wish that I had never wore my headphones so loud. And I always tell people, don't do that. Turn it down. Turn it down. My husband's yelled at me for a year that, you just can't be too loud with your headphones. Turn them down. So all that to say, I'm working on the tinnitus. I'm trying to make a joyful noise, as they say. But, in Psalm 100, I'm also realizing that this clamorous life is something that continues to just resonate in my head. The remembrance process of loud times in my life that have been so joyful. The Bible says very clearly to make a joyful noise unto the Lord and serve the Lord with gladness, come into his presence with singing, and know that the Lord, he is God. It's he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise, and give thanks to him. Bless his name, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever. I love that. And so when I cultivate this whole process in my life, and I go back and I think about how loud and how obnoxious, I have been over the years, I say, Lord, thank you for that sound of silence that reminds me that I am so desperately in need of that spiritual interruption to quiet my spirit and to say, yes, Lord, I am keeping myself quiet and I'm keeping myself peaceful. And according to interruption science, we're interrupted about every 3 minutes. Did you know that? Am I interrupting you now? It sounds familiar. The very fact that we have a field of science dedicated to interruption in evidence of how bad noise has gotten in our world tells us all I need to know. They're going to find all kinds of things. In fact, for the last 30 plus years, an acoustic ecologist named Gordon Hempton compiled what he called the list of the last great quiet places. Wow. And it consists of places with at least 15 minutes of uninterrupted quiet during daylight hours. And at last count, there were only 12 quiet places in the entire United States. And we wonder why our soul suffers, because we're constantly filling it. We're constantly, I don't care if you're listening to praise tapes or, listen to me, praise tapes, or praise online through your iPhone, or you're listening to worship services, or you're still, sometimes you need a break. You need a break. And it's hard to tune out the voice of others. The call of social media and the constant demand to do more and be more is constantly there. But here's what my heart says to you today. God often speaks the loudest when we're the quietest. Mark Batterson told us that. The white noise that I hear in my phone, and I have an app that I actually put on sometimes in a hotel room when I can't sleep very well. It's called white noise. The white noise of the world might be the greatest impediment to our spiritual growth. And what I mean by that is the definition, white noise is a sound that contains every frequency a human can hear. And because it contains every frequency, it's very difficult to hear any frequency, especially the still small voice of God. That's why you have to separate yourself. That's why you have to get to a quiet place. And that's why, even if you have tinnitus or ringing in your ears when you're quiet, asking God to heal those ears and to heal those cells in the brain that are causing that, but saying, God, help me to focus on you once again. Over the past 10 years, there's been several audio books that come out with incredible, brilliant sounds. And during a recording session, I was told about an operating procedure for sound mixers in an industry that actually helps to relate a peaceful vibe, V-I-B-E, into your soul. The psalmist refers to that as their refuge, their fortress, and their ever-present help in time of need. But my favorite description of all of that might be this: my hiding place. Leaving the clamorous life for the hiding place. Psalm 32:7 says, you, Jesus, are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Praise God for that. 1 Kings 19:11 through 12 also said this, that the Lord says, go out and stand on the mountain and in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Wow. I'm in the middle of the mountains right now as I speak. I'm in the middle of the Pennsylvania mountains, and they are just green and beautiful. And I've had to take some time to take the headphones off, to silence my phone, to turn the radio off, and to walk in the stately presence of God among the trees in the mountains. And can I tell you something? I really hear God. I really hear him. A great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, it says. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came the gentle whisper. After everything was gone, everything was wiped out, the whisper, the gentle whisper of God could be heard. Thanks for tuning in to the Ubiquitous Podcast. You know, in the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. And in the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly. And here's what I pray every day. Lord, I want to hear your whispers louder than the noise of the world surrounding me. What do you want to say to me today? And I say that to you. What does God want to say to you today? Get on SueDuffield.com, and there's all kinds of ways to stay connected. You can also send me an email at radiosue@me.com. And we are just thankful for the patrons that keep this ministry afloat. Patreon.com, Patreon, Patreon.com/Sue Duffield. And for as little as $5 a month, you can help us get the message out of this Ubiquitous Podcast. This is the last episode of the very first season. We'll see you next week with episode number 1 of season 2.